So the story that Jesus tells in Matthew is a story that's really meant to provoke us. It's meant to provoke, in other words, people who are good people, who are hardworking people, and who have a sense of fairness, which I hope is all of us. But Jesus tells it in a way to really jab people who are like that, people who are good, fair, hardworking people. Because the way he does it, he sets up the story that, as you heard, the landowner hires some day laborers early in the morning and says, I'll give you a denarian, a day's wage, if you come and work for me for the day. But then throughout the day, the landowner goes back to the market and finds more people and keeps calling them to work and saying, I'll pay you what's fair. At the very end of the day, there's only a couple hours left to work. He goes and there's still people in this marketplace. He calls them to come and do the work. And then at the end, see, this is where it's provocative, because Jesus could have told the story that the landowner paid the people who worked the longest first, so that they got their day's wage and then went on their way. And were none the wiser that all these people who worked only a little bit were going to get the same as they were. But he doesn't do it that way. He sets them up, right? He's like, you guys watch what I'm about to do. And he gives the person who worked the very least a day's wage, which then makes the hardworking, good, fair-minded people think, oh, the hourly rate has changed. And we've worked all day long, and we're going to get a nice sum of money now. And when he gets to the people who worked all day, they get exactly the same as the person who worked a little bit. And if you feel that that's unfair, you are right. That is unfair. And there's two ways we can apply this. One is, this is the deathbed confession parable. Right? This is the scoundrel who was a scoundrel all their life, and life filled with debauchery and selfishness, but on their deathbed, they confessed it all and said that they were sorry, and they repented, and they asked for God's grace and forgiveness, and God said, you are forgiven. And that person goes into heaven. And all of us who have been going to church every dang Sunday and not doing the things that we really wanted to do, we are feeling that's a little unfair. And we go to heaven, and there are these people that were the scoundrels all their life. We're like, but I think we can actually handle that. For one thing, God can do with heaven what God wants. And if we get there, we better be prepared for whoever we find to live with them for a long time. And so there's that, and we're going to be dead, so who cares anyway, right? But the other way to apply this parable, and what Matthew is often doing in the gospel, is he's trying to ask us to think about church differently. He's speaking to the early church. And I wonder if in this parable what he's saying is, those of us who have been coming to church, to this church, and giving generously and working on the committees and doing all the work and coming every Sunday, we don't get a more privileged place at the table than people who just got here yesterday. Because the qualifier for being a part of the church is that you are a child of God. And every single person who walks in this door is a child of God. And that goes against that goes against our sense of fairness, because we have paid our dues and we know what's right and we know what's good for this community. And can we really give people who are just walking in an equal seat at the table? But that's what this is calling us to do. And further, it may be calling us, can we also give an equal or maybe a privileged voice to those who have not yet come in the door, to those who are still standing in the marketplace, waiting to be called in, to be a part of God's labor, to be a part of God's work in this community? Can we do that? Can we put our sense of fairness aside and acknowledge that anybody who walks in here is a child of God, is made in the image of God, and has a seat at the table in this church? I want to push this one step further and ask, what happens if we look backwards in time? As we start to look at these windows and wonder about these windows and reflect on them, Are we giving a more privileged seat at the table to the people who bought these windows and decided what the images should be? And this is a little bit harder because sometimes, yes, we are going to give a more privileged seat at the table to those who have been luminaries from the past, those who have been saints, those who have taught us and inspire us through their teaching and their wisdom and their example. And yeah, we might say, yeah, I remember that person, or, we might read the teachings of Dr. King or Gandhi or Mother Teresa or any of those people and say, they get a more privileged seat at the table because their teachings have stood the test of time. So when you open it up to the past, there's some interesting dynamics that happen. And there's a practicality to this. Like if we all had a big meeting today and we decided today that this building should be round, that really meets the values of this church today more, we're not going to tear down the building and build a round church because we're practical people. And we've already got a building and they're expensive, right? And so there's that element that some of the, the windows keep out the rain, and the windows do have this beauty, really, the way the light comes through and the different images that we see. And so there's a practicality that, yes, even though somebody a long time ago who maybe had very different values than us gave these windows, we're not going to necessarily throw them out just because of that. And then the other piece, though, is that from what I know of the way churches work, and I bet this was true 100 years ago too, the person who gave the money got to pick what the window was going to look like, I bet. And one of the things that's reason I think of that is there's so many Jesuses in these windows. There's like 6 Jesuses in these windows. And it makes me think that they gave the money, they said it's $10,000 for a window, and they gave $10,000. Like, what do you want? I want Jesus. I want Jesus. He's the guy. And maybe the committee said, well, we have 4 Jesuses already. It's like, I don't care. I'm giving the money. I want Jesus. And so in some ways, the only thing that distinguished the people who gave these windows may have been that they had money. And they had the wealth to do it. And that's, according to the gospel, not a good decider of who gets a seat at the table. So you're going to be invited in a few minutes to get up and move around. If you have mobility issues, we're actually going to put a slideshow of the windows on the screen. So you can just look at them from there. You can look at them from here. You're especially invited to come up and look at this one, Christ the Consoler. While you're walking around in no particular order, you can come to the communion table and receive communion. There'll be servers here to give you the words, the bread of life, the cup of salvation. And it's going to be a time just to walk around and reflect. And there's some discussion questions in here, in your bulletin. You don't have to use these, but if they want to guide your thinking, you may want to look at them as you walk around. And then we're going to have a time afterwards to share any reflections, reactions that you had as you looked at these windows. You know from Myra's presentation last time that this conversation is being initiated by the Racial Justice Committee, partly through their truth and reconciliation work. It has looked back and realized, for instance, that the woman that this window is in memory of was a slaveholder. And so that's where some of the values from that time come into our day today, and they're like, does this work anymore? Does it work in this place? And you may have also remember from that presentation that most of the images of these people, angels, whatever, are white faces. Except for this Jesus, who's a little bit darker. He's been out in the sun a little bit more. But those values are important. So anybody who comes in this church today, if they take up a look up at these windows, there's these white faces looking down at them. And I'll testify that I was here a very long time, at least a decade or more, before that even occurred to me, right? Because I'm a white guy in a society that's white supremacist and made for white people, and I'm used to seeing white faces everywhere, and it never even occurred to me that every face in these windows was white. Until in this process it was pointed out, and I'm like, oh my, wow. We are looking for a beloved community where everybody's welcome, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their gender. Everybody's welcome into this building. And that kind of bothers me. And maybe it doesn't bother you, and that's okay. One of the things that's impressed me about the group doing this work is they don't have an agenda of what they think is going to happen next. They've been in their conversations planning for this day. Nobody's like, well, this is step one to get to this plan that we have next. We're all kind of keeping that back and saying, we just want to start a conversation. We want people to engage and reflect on some of these issues related to these windows. And that's what you're invited to do today.